Under fire, the mountain shook. The first salvo had already torn chunks from the ridge above the command post, showering the entrance with rock shards and dust. The second had walked itself closer, bracketing the comm antennas and turning them into twisted metal. The third slammed into the slope 30 meters short of the bunker and rolled a wave of pressure through the dugout like an invisible fist. Maps jumped on the table. Coffee mugs toppled. A fluorescent tube overhead exploded with a sharp pop and went dark, leaving the room smeared in red from the emergency lights. Someone screamed. Someone else didn't have time. A jagged crack spidered across one of the reinforced walls as dirt rained from the ceiling. The smell of concrete dust and burned insulation settled into every breath. "Counter battery," General Cade roared, his voice trying to outrun the growing thunder. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his gray hair plastered to his forehead with sweat and grit. The front of his combat shirt was spattered with someone else's blood and his own coffee. "Tell me the guns are moving." His operations officer, Major Harrow, had a headset pressed so hard to one ear it looked like he was trying to burrow through his own skull. "Sir, counter-battery radar's gone. First strike. We're blind. Mobile batteries are changing positions, but..." Another impact cut him off. This one landed somewhere up the flank, a white flash through the bunker's open door followed by a rising column of pulverized stone. Bits of rock pinged off the sandbagged doorway like hail. The bunker seemed to inhale dust and exhale panic. "They are walking it in," Harrow finished hoarsely. On the far wall, a map of the valley was pinned beneath strips of transparent overlay, grease pencil lines tracing arcs of probability and phase lines. A red X marked their own headquarters perch just below the ridgeline. On a distant ridge, nearly obscured beneath a strip of transparent tape and dotted math, someone had marked a small black circle. Suspected enemy fire coordination node. For kilometers away as the crow flew. Much further when the air was razor-thin and treacherous, the wind was an animal with moods, and the enemy had the high ground and the guns. General Cade slammed a fist on the table, not from anger, but to stop its trembling. His own? The table's? At that moment, he couldn't tell. He grabbed the handheld mic attached to the bunker's intercom and thumbed the transmit key with a kind of fury. "Any snipers?" he shouted into the mic, the plea ripped from somewhere deeper than protocol. "Any snipers on this net?" Static coughed back at him. Then a half-dozen voices overlapped, fractured by interference and the percussion hammer of artillery. "Spectre Actual, this is Ghost 3. Forward Observer Alpha. Command, this is Ridge Team. We're pinned, can't." He shut his eyes for a breath, teeth clenched, and then bellowed over them. "Long glass. Longest reach. I don't care who. I need eyes on that node, and a shot. For kilometers." Harrow grabbed his forearm. "Sir, 4,000 meters with this wind is..." "What we have," Cade snapped, ripping free. "Before those guns finish their ladder and erase this entire ridge." Outside, the distant boom of a far-off enemy battery came as a dull, almost polite sound. The shell's arrival, moments later, was anything but. The bunker shook again. Lights flickered. Somewhere beyond the door, someone yelled for a medic who was never going to answer. The radio hissed, belched static, then settled into a low hum. "Command, this is Specter 6. The voice was calm. Too calm, set against the chaos. A flat, almost bored tone knife through the fear spiking Cade's veins. Harrow turned, eyes wide. "Sir." Cade brought the mic to his mouth. "Specter 6, identify. Call sign Specter 6, attached to Recon Company Zulu, currently overwatching your sector from Grid Delta 79. Two-man detachment. We have eyes on the node." The voice was neither male nor female in any obvious way, just quiet, smooth, with a dust-dry accent that could have come from anywhere. Cade seized on it like a rope thrown into deep water. "Range to the node, Specter 6? A pause. Somewhere, someone was lying behind a rifle, doing math. "4,006 meters, sir," the voice replied. "Line of sight. Angle of 23 degrees downward from our position. Wind complicated." Another shell screamed overhead, each descending howl like the breath of something ancient and murderous. It landed further up this time, closer to the supply dumps. The concussion rolled through the bunker like surf through a cave. How complicated? Cade asked through clenched teeth. The answer came not as panic, but as physics. We've got a crosswind at the node, about 12 meters per second from south-southwest, gusting higher. The valley is channeling a different layer coming from the west. Light updrafts near the midpoint. Density altitude is over 2,900 meters. At 4 kilometers, shot travel time will be close to 6 seconds. That's a long time for the wind to change its mind. Cade stared at the map as if he could see through paper and earth and mountain stone to the distant ridge. What are you armed with? Custom .408 rifle. 28-inch barrel, match suppressor. Hand-loaded, very low-drag rounds. Our spotter's got a vector rangefinder, kestrel, and a brain like a calculator. Cade heard a faint, indignant rude in the background, the second voice quieter, but warmed the air somehow. Then the primary voice again. But with this wind, 4,000 meters is still long odds, sir. I don't want odds, Cade rasped as another round detonated close enough to bow the bunker's wall inward for a heartbeat. I want that node silent. How many shots do you need? Specter Six didn't answer right away. In the silence, the general heard other things. Men and women yelling outside. The distant whine of medevac rotors trying to brave the storm. The slow crumble of stone from somewhere along the ridge. The mountain itself taking shallow, painful breaths under the bombardment. Specter Six, Cade insisted. Honestly, the sniper said finally. I'd like to do it in one. Specter Six lay prone in a shallow scrape of rock and snow, the world narrowed to a circle of glass and the steady rhythm of their own breathing. The rifle was cradled into their shoulder, built to their exact length of pull and cheek weld. The scope's reticle cut the universe into mills and subtensions. The bipod's feet dug into stone dust like claws. Behind them, crouched just slightly lower on the slope, Ash worked through data as if the storm of artillery was a mild inconvenience on an otherwise fine day. Ash's real name was long, with syllables that liked to wrap themselves around each other. Most people mangled it. Ash was simpler, and it fit. He had a habit of looking at the world as if he could see every variable suspended in the air, faint graphite equations hanging between mountains and buildings and people. He spoke now, his voice low but steady, heartbeat barely faster than a resting jogger's. Okay, confirming range, 4.006 kilometers. Angle down 23 degrees. Barometric pressure is down, air thin. Temperature, 3 degrees centigrade and dropping. Humidity low. That gives us. The kestrel's tiny fan whirred in his palm as it read the air. Numbers fed into his brain. He scribbled on his wristboard with a stub of pencil, then muttered to himself, lips moving without sound, before saying aloud. Elevation. You're going to need 15 mils up from your zero. Maybe a hair more. Okay. For wind. He frowned. Wind. Always the wind. It ran fingers along Specter Six's exposed cheek, testing them, teasing them. At this altitude, it never blew in one direction. It curled, dipped, roared through the passes like water through jagged rocks. You didn't fight it. You learned its moods, or got killed trying. Down in the valley, the general's ridge was taking punishment. Even from this distance, flashes winked through the haze of dust and smoke, blooming on the near ridge like angry, ephemeral flowers. The sound arrived late, delayed by distance, but it was still enough to rattle pebbles around Specter's elbows. Talk to me about the node, Specter murmured. They spotted through the scope. I pressed to the rubber cup, the outside world narrowing to a perfect circle. The enemy fire coordination node was dug into a shelf on the far ridge. Not as deep as Cade's bunker, though. Hubris, or belief in their distance and cannon to keep them safe. The node was a low concrete bunker partially recessed into the rock. A retractable armored cupola sat atop it, slit windows like a visor. Antennas bristled from a nearby mast, some already knuckled over from near misses. Around the node, silhouettes flickered. Crew, guards, runners darting to and from. Specter picked through them with the scope, feeling the small, familiar rise of focus in their chest. Spotter target? Ash asked. The cupola. It's command and targeting. Shutters open halfway. I've got 2 heads in view, maybe 3, plus a rack of optics. If I take the center mass of the visible slot, I might punch through glass and a brain or 2. Best case, I hit the equipment. Either way, they'll be blind. Not bad for an optimistic day at the office, Ash said. Specter smiled without humor. The call had come down 20 minutes earlier, when the first shells had started landing on Cade's ridge. They'd been in their hide for 6 hours already, observing the valley, reporting movements through encrypted burst transmissions. They'd watched the first twist of smoke spiral from the enemy's guns further back and trace the arcs, saw where they'd fall. Ash had tracked the shell paths, triangulated, muttered curse words in several languages, then said, "They're going to find him. They got his bunker plotted. He's not dug in as deep as he thinks." Specter had watched through the glass as the first impact blossomed too close to the command ridge. Something cold and precise had clicked inside them. They grabbed the long rifle from its padded sleeve and slid into prone position on the forward lip of the hide. The world had turned into math and breath and wind and stone once again. Now, with Cade's voice ringing in their ears, those elements had teeth. Ash crawled up next to them, the kestrel now clipped to a small tripod jammed into the ground. A lightweight anemometer and a handheld tablet were plugged into a compact weather and ballistic computer, its screen glowing faintly under the camo mesh they'd strung over themselves. "You know they'll be trying to hunt us once we fire," Ash murmured. "They already are," Specter replied. "They just don't know where to aim yet." As if to punctuate the point, far-off flashes sparkled behind the far ridge as the enemy gun spoke again. Moments later, more shells clawed at Cade's mountain. Specter's jaw tightened. "Give me my first solution." Ash rattled off the numbers, soft and firm. Elevation 15 mils. Wind from your left to right, call it full value at the node, about 12 meters per second. That's rough. Gusts are higher. Mid-flight, wind veers more westerly, slightly quartering. Call it. It's going to decelerate as you climb. Let's start with 9 mils of wind, hold left, and adjust. Specter rolled the turrets, fingers nimble despite the cold. The scope's reticle rose and slid, crosshair climbing above the enemy bunker, then drifting left of the cupola. "This is guesswork," they said. "Educated guesswork," Ash replied. "Never undersell me. They don't have 13 shells worth of patience for our learning curve. So don't need 13, Ash said simply. They needed 13. The first shot went wide. They knew at the moment the rifle recoiled into their shoulder, the sound of the suppressed boom punching into their eardrums, and then the long, aching wait, exactly the kind that always stretched into an hour when it was really seconds. Specter watched through the scope, rifle stock welded to their cheek. The bullet's supersonic crack wasn't audible over the artillery, but the puff of impact on a rock outcropping just left of the node told the story. Low left, overcompensated on wind, under on elevation. Low and left, Specter said quietly. Impact about 3 meters from the cupola. Maybe 4. Splash point gives us some data on that crosswind. Ash had already adjusted something on the tablet. Copy. Node hasn't reacted yet. They probably thought it was debris or a stray. Okay, adjust. Add 0.5 mil up, cut 2 mils from windhold. The second shot felt better. Crisper. It went long. The tiny burst of rock dust above and behind the node was nearly lost in a blossom of their own outgoing artillery, but the geometry was impossible to mistake. High by 2 meters, right by 1, Specter grunted. Ash scribbled, recalculated. By the 5th shot, the node knew. Damn, Ash muttered as, through the scope, Specter saw figures scatter around the cupola. One of the slit windows slammed shut. The crew inside must have finally realized that the random stings of stone around them were not stray fragments, but incoming, deliberate. Too many in one pattern, Specter said. They're not stupid. No, Ash agreed. But they still haven't found us. Range is too long. They'll have a search grid, but they can't be precise unless we give them something to work with. Like a muzzle signature. Like that, Ash agreed. The 7th shot kissed the edge of the cupola, taking a chip out of the armor and leaving a starburst of fresh metal exposed. Specter knew they'd been inches from ending it. They forced themselves not to curse, not to let the flush of frustration spoil their breathing. That one was close, Ash said softly. Very close. The wind gusted up right before impact. We saw it in the trace. The trace, subtle distortions in the air, almost mirage-like, that snipers learned to read the way sailors read waves. At this range, even the trace was faint and hard to track, but Ash saw what others missed. Adjust, Specter asked. Quarter mil down, quarter mil left. Same elevation. We're building the pattern. Each shot is a data point. 13 data points get us killed. Not if they're fast. They were fast. The rhythm became automatic. Specter squeezed the trigger, rode the recoil, hung on the glass to spot the impact. Ash watched with both scope and the digital trace, correcting infractions that would have meant nothing to anyone else and meant life or death here. Each time they fired, Ash started counting under his breath. 1001, 1002. At around 1006, they would see the dust bloom. Then the adjustment. Then another round into the chamber, the bolt sliding forward, the metallic click almost cozy compared to the thunder rolling from the valley's flanks. Around shot number 9, a shell landed on the slope 200 meters to their right, close enough to pepper their hide with grit. Specter felt the ground shudder through their ribs. Pebbles bounced from the camo netting and pattered across their back. A sliver of shrapnel whined past somewhere overhead. That was rude, Ash said evenly, brushing dust from the tablet with a gloved hand. They're bracketing the ridge now. Someone down there doesn't like you. They'll have to get in line, Specter replied. Cade's voice cut in over the radio, a little harsher each time. Specter 6, this is command. Status of target node. They keyed their throat mic without taking their eye off the scope. Working problem, command. We've got data from multiple shots. We're inside a few meters, but the wind's trickier than anticipated. How long? Cade demanded. Behind his voice, they could hear a dull roar and someone yelling something about structural integrity. Each shot takes 6 seconds to travel, sir. We're slicing the air margin. Give us. They almost said 3 more shots, but that felt like a lie. The wind might decide otherwise. Give us what you have. A pause long enough to hold a war. That's all I have to give, Cade replied. Command out. Shot 10 hit the mast supporting the node's antennas. The mast shivered, cables snapping free in a shower of sparks, one of the antennas toppling over. The bunker itself, though, remained stubbornly intact. Wind shifted at the node, Ash growled. Little bastards. Whole valley exhaled. Specter inhaled. Slow, steady, audible even in their own head. The rifle's weight anchored them. 13 misses, the title of some future after-action report, if anyone survived to write it. 13 shots that had gouged the rocks around the node, shredded the mast, chipped the cupola, terrified the staff, but not yet killed the fire coordinator calling down hell on Cade's ridge. And each of those shells, each of those misses was time. Time that the general might not have. Inside the mountain, Cade felt the bunker tiring. Reinforced concrete had a way of talking under stress. It creaked, groaned, shed dust like old bones. Engineers like to tell you those sounds meant the material was doing its job, flexing instead of shattering. But every groan sounded like a warning to Cade now. A shell landed somewhere almost directly above. The bunker's lights flickered, and this time, one of them didn't come back. The map on the wall partially peeled, curling at the edges from the force of repeated concussions. A young sergeant with a buzz cut and too many days of beard growth burst into the room, eyes ringed with grime. Sir, casualty reports from the upper trenches. We've lost 3 more. Med stations 2 and 4 are gone. These shells, they're not random. They're stepping them straight down our line. Of course they're not random, Cade snapped, then immediately regretted the tone when the young man flinched. He wasn't angry at the sergeant. He was angry at the far ridge, at the unseen men and women calmly reading grids and adjusting dials. Sorry, you did good bringing the report. Get some water, then get back up there and keep your people's heads down as much as you can. The sergeant nodded, throat bobbing, and hustled out. Harrow looked like he was aging a year per impact. He was pale beneath his dust mask, hands trembling slightly as he shuffled papers that no longer mattered. We should consider evacuation, Harrow muttered. Secondary command position is dug into the western slope. It's not as forward, but evacuate through that, Cade said, gesturing toward the entrance where dust was streaming in under the blast curtain like smoke. We line our people up in the open for a precision barrage. This bunker is our best chance until that node dies. If it dies, Harrow said under his breath. Cade heard anyway. He also heard the word the man hadn't said. If Specter 6 fails. He turned back to the radio. Specter 6, update. Working, came the reply. No excuses, no qualifiers. Just that. For the first time in 30 years of command, Cade realized that his life, and the lives of hundreds on this ridge, now hinged on one rifle 4 kilometers away and a voice that didn't sound old enough to shave. Come on, he whispered into the hum of static. Come on, sniper. The 13th shot sailed so close to perfect that for a moment Specter thought they'd done it. The bullet's impact was invisible, lost in the very center of the slot of the cupola. There was no burst of debris outside, no obvious spray of stone, just the slight flicker of something, a dark shape toppling backward and then vanishing from the slit. But the artillery didn't stop. Did you see that? Ash asked. Maybe, Specter said, their chest tight. I might have taken someone's hat off. Or their head. Engel was right. But Ash shook his head. Node still transmitting. Listen. In their earpiece, a ghost of the enemy's fire control net crackled. They couldn't hear words. Those were encrypted. But the structure of it, the cadence of someone calling out ranges and corrections persisted. If the coordinator was dead, someone else had already slipped into the chair. 13 misses. No, 13 lessons. Specter swallowed. Their mouth tasted like dust and copper. I'm walking the impacts around the cupola, they murmured. We're measuring the wind with every shot, not just at the node, but along the entire flight path. We've got uplifts near the midpoint, weird eddies near that broken mast, and we're almost out of time. Ash finished for them. Yeah, I know. He tapped numbers again, the digits smearing from sweat and dust on his wristboard. Look at this. Plotting the miss pattern, the gust vectors. The wind isn't random. It's brutal, but it's still obeying the terrain. He held his wrist up for Specter to glance at, though they didn't dare look away from the scope for long. A rough sketch of the valley and surrounding ridges was overlaid with arrows indicating wind direction and strength at different points along the bullet's path. The cluster of impact marks around the node painted a tight ellipse, each one a small circle with a line showing where the shot had been aimed. 13 shots. 13 dots. You see it? Ash asked. Specter did. It clicked the way the solution to a stubborn equation sometimes did. All at once, as if a curtain had been pulled aside. The wind wasn't a flat sheet across the valley. It was spiraling, curling, twisting up the flanks of the mountains, and washing back down. There was a narrow corridor, almost a tunnel, where the gusts consistently shifted in the same pattern. If they aimed not at where the target was, but where the wind was about to shove the bullet through that corridor. Specter's hand steadied. What are you thinking? Ash asked, eyes searching their face. I'm thinking the mountain is telling us which way to shoot, Specter said quietly. We just haven't been listening right. They backed off the scope for a heartbeat, closing their eyes. Behind the lids, they replayed each shot. They visualized the bullet leaving the barrel, hitting the first crosswind, drifting, then climbing into a layer where the gusts were weaker, then dropping again near the node where the wind roared like a passing train. They saw the impacts as red dots, the misses forming a pattern like thrown stones around a mark in the dust. You're going to have to trust me, they said to Ash. I always do, Ash replied without hesitation. What we're doing here is insane, but that's never stopped us. Specter allowed themselves a short huff of breath, almost a laugh. Insanity's just a misdiagnosed pattern. They rolled their shoulders, feeling muscles complain. Their stomach cramped with hunger they'd been ignoring for hours. They're right, I ache from the scope's narrow focus. Their trigger finger felt both numb and too sensitive. They settled back behind the rifle. Ash, yeah, feed me something simple. Numbers only. No commentary. Roger that. Ash's voice went clinical. Range 4.006 kilometers. Elevation hold 14.7 mils up. Wind hold 10.3 mils left from center. Plus an offset. The offset wasn't on the chart. Specter added it anyway. They dialed one less click on the wind than the math said, trusting what the trace and the movement of dust devils in the valley told them. Trusting the way the mountains had spoken in the last split second before 3 of their previous shots. Trusting something that wasn't in the manual. Ash, they said softly. Yeah. This is the one. After this, we relocate. They're already ranging us. Ash didn't say you said that after shot 7. He didn't say you said that after shot 10. He just nodded. Then let's make it count. The rifle came alive in Specter's hands in a way it hadn't since training, the way it had that day on the plateau, when an instructor had told them that at truly extreme ranges, a shooter wasn't doing ballistics anymore. They were doing faith with math attached. They plastered their cheek to the stock, feeling its familiar contours settle against bone. They exhaled gently through parted lips, fogging the inside of the scope's rubber eye cup for a heartbeat. The crosshair steadied on empty air left of the cupola, high above it. Not at the target, at the wind. They watched the fumaroles of dust in the mid-valley, the tiny whirls of grit that only another sniper would see as anything but random. They waited. A gust swept along the far slope, visible as a faint shimmer. Now, Specter was unaware of the pressure on the trigger until it broke. The rifle chucked back into their shoulder with its familiar shove, and the sound of the suppressed shot was swallowed by distant thunder. But in their perception, everything slowed. Ash began the count, voice steady as a metronome. 1001. The bullet left the muzzle at nearly 3 times the speed of sound, a sliver of metal and spin, an intent knifing through the cold mountain air. It dove into the first crosswind, already drifting exactly as predicted. 1002. It climbed, propelled by its own arcing path in the thinness of the air, up into a layer where the wind bent slightly, quartering instead of pushing full on. The bullet yawed almost imperceptibly, stabilizing. 1003. Midway over the valley, the updraft they'd mapped lifted it like an unseen hand. It rode that curtain of warmer air for a heartbeat, rising a fraction more than pure math would have suggested. 1004. On the far slope, the spiral of wind curled around the ridgeline. Dust devils that had looked like random swirls were actually the edges of a narrow, consistent flow. The bullet entered that flow and was nudged just enough to the right and down. 1005. The cupola loomed in the bullet's future, still yards away in human terms, but a blink in its own. Inside, someone was shouting, pointing at fresh chips in the armor from previous impacts. A hand reached up to pull a lever, maybe to close the shutters. 1006. Specter didn't see the moment of impact as a burst of gore. They saw it as a clean, sudden hole appearing in the middle of the slit, glass and metal exploding outward. The bullet punched through the narrow gap at an angle only a madman or a genius, or both, would have aimed for. Concrete dust and shards of optic flew from the other side of the cupola, carried by the projectile's remaining energy. Something inside the node went dark. Several someones went silent. There was a half-second lag. Then the artillery stopped. Not all at once. Guns didn't shut down like that. But the rhythm broke. The cascading sequence of fire paused. The next salvo, which should have followed by rote after a 6-second delay, never came. On Cade's ridge, the absence of explosion was as shocking as any blast. The mountains seemed to inhale again, this time in something like relief. In the hide, Ash let his breath out in a shudder. You hit it, he said. You actually... Stay on it, Specter cut in. Confirm. Ash's tablet chirped as signals from their tiny, hidden listening device near the node fed in. The encrypted traffic they'd been able to skim shifted abruptly. There were shouts, confusion. No new fire missions were being authorized. The node's laser designator went offline, its output flatlining. Node is down, Ash said, all creeping into his voice. Their targeting network just fractured. Guns are blind. They can still shoot, but they're not going to hit anything smaller than a mountain if they do. Specter's hands trembled, the delayed reaction arriving. They lifted their cheek from the stock, blinking hard as their right eye protested. Tell command, they said hoarsely, before someone decides to test that hypothesis. In the bunker, Cade's radio crackled. "Command, this is Specter 6, the calm voice said. "Node neutralized, confirming disruption on their net. Their last salvo cycle's gone into hang fire. We recommend you move your people now, sir," while their heads are still spinning. For a heartbeat, the bunker was silent. Then everyone seemed to talk at once. Harrow yelled for the runner to sound the move order. The battered communications techs resumed, shouting into their sets with renewed energy. Someone laughed, a cracked, disbelieving sound, until it turned into something like a sob. Cade closed his eyes, just for a second. The pounding he'd braced himself for didn't come. He opened his eyes again and hissed into the mic, "Specter 6, you did it." "Working problem as ordered, sir," Specter replied. If there was satisfaction in their tone, it was buried deep. "Casualties on our side, the team's still 2 out of 2. Ash's voice chimed in faintly in the background. "We'll need a new hide soon. They've started probing our slope with fire, but they're guessing." Cade looked toward the entrance, where dust continued to fall, but this time in a slower, lazier way, as if from a building that had decided it was allowed to stand a while longer. "You'll get more than a new hide," he growled, a thread of something like fierce pride threading his exhaustion. "You'll get a medal so heavy you'll need a brace to wear it." Ash's laugh came through, genuine and surprised. Specter said nothing. "Specter 6, Cade continued, something he hadn't said to this generation of soldiers in a long time. "The entire ridge owes you one. I owe you one." Specter's reply was simple. "We owe the mountains, sir. We just listened." They couldn't stay in that hide, of course. The enemy, furious and shaken, began to rake the slope with indirect fire the moment they triangulated the general area from which the miraculous shot had come. Shells plowed into rock and snow along the ridge, some too close for comfort. Specter and Ash had already planned their exit. Nothing that close to the front was supposed to be permanent. You stayed alive by staying mobile. They slid backward off the lip of their hide, keeping low, staying behind the spine of stone that shielded them from direct observation. Gear went into packs in practice motions. The rifle slipped back into its case like a sword into a sheath. As they crab-walked along a narrow goat trail, stones clattering away into the great distances below, Ash couldn't seem to keep his eyes off Specter. "What?" Specter asked finally, breath puffing in small clouds. "For 1,000 meters," he said slowly. "You hit a sliver of armor, slit maybe 30 centimeters high and not even that wide, with a bullet that had to ride 6 different gust layers and an updraft, and you did it with 1.3 mils of gut feeling." "More like 1.27, Specter muttered. "That makes it so much less crazy," Ash said. Specter gave a small shrug under the straps of their pack. "We had 13 tries." He slipped. For a second, his boot skidded on loose scree and his knee banged into the rock. Ash's hand shot out, grabbing a strap, hauling him back from the edge. They both froze, chests heaving, the valley spinning far below. "You okay?" Ash asked, voice suddenly tight. "Yeah," Specter said. He looked down at the scuffed rock where his boot had slipped, then out at the ridge where the node had been. Smoke still oozed from the ruined cupola. The structure now, just another ugly scar on an already battered mountain. He thought about the 13 rounds embedded in the stone around it, each a tiny glint of metal, each marking a miss that had been, in truth, a lesson. "We had 13 tries," he repeated softly. "We used them." Ash followed his gaze, then nodded. "I've been thinking about that," he said. "How people are going to tell this story. They're going to make it sound like you walked up here, fired one shot, and saved the mountain." "That's the story," Specter said. "But it's not the truth." Specter grunted. "Truth won't fit on a metal ribbon." "So what? Let them tell the legend." Ash asked. Specter didn't answer immediately. He thought of Cade's voice, raw over the radio, of the sergeant in the bunker, eyes haunted, of medics carrying wounded through dust and rock, of the men and women who had died on the ridge waiting for that one shot. "If it gives them something to hold on to," he said finally, "then let them." "But you'll know it was the misses that made the shot," Ash said. "Yes," Specter said. "We will." In the weeks that followed, the shelling of Cade's Ridge became a story passed in mess tents and trenches, over cold rations and quick cigarettes. The terrified bombardment, the bunker creaking, the general shout. Any snipers? Echoed in retold versions that varied in detail, but not in heart. Some versions had Cade standing on the ridge under fire, looking up at the sky when he called for the sniper. Others had him calmly sipping coffee in a bunker that never shook. Heroes burned brighter in recollection than in truth. Specter Six shot grew with each telling. The distance rounded up. 4,000 meters became 4,500, sometimes 5,000 when the storyteller was on his third drink. The wind became a hurricane. The target window shrank. Eventually, some swore that the shot had passed through the scope of an enemy observer before entering the coordinator's forehead. Ash collected the stories like bottle caps. He would sit, quiet and anonymous in crowded, noisy rooms, listening to soldiers from other units talk about that one insane sniper. He rarely corrected them. It amused him to hear how the story mutated. Once in a rear area bar stitched together from plywood and hopes, he overheard a young logistics corporal breathlessly inform a table of transfixed friends that Specter Six had fired blind, eyes closed, guided only by the voice of the mountain. Ash snorted into his drink so hard he almost choked. He didn't tell them about the kestrels and ballistic calculators, the hours of training on windswept plateaus, the charts that had covered his bunk like a madman's wallpaper. He didn't tell them about the 13 misses, each one a leap of data, each one a risk. When he got back to their shared corner of the temporary barracks, Specter was cleaning the rifle, moving a cloth with slow, careful strokes through the barrel. "They're saying you talked to the mountain," Ash said. "Didn't we?" Specter replied without looking up. Ash perched on the spare cot, stretching his long legs out. "I heard one version where you supposedly shot from a hang glider." "That sounds drafty," Specter said. "They've downgraded me to assistant in most retellings," Ash added, mock-wounded. "Sometimes I'm not mentioned at all. Apparently, the legend only has room for one ghost." "It's a call sign," Specter said. "Have to admit, though," Ash said, voice softening, "there's one part of the legend I like." "What's that?" "They've kept the line," he said. "In every story, the general still screams the same thing. Any snipers? Every time. Like a prayer." Specter paused mid-stroke, then resumed. "That part's true," he said quietly. "Yeah," Ash agreed. "I know. General Cade didn't like medal ceremonies. He had a drawer full of his own somewhere, back in a life that felt like someone else's. At this stage, he considered them heavy metal distractions from what had to be done. But command insisted. Morale matters, they told him. People need symbols. They need stories to point at when the days are long and the air smells like dust and worry. So he stood on a makeshift stage in front of ranks of soldiers whose uniforms were as tired as their faces, a row of cameras capturing it all for the home front. Specter Six stood before him, uniform pressed, boots scuffed, hair regulation short. Ash stood one step back and to the side, spotter's badge gleaming, hands clasped behind his back. The metal on the tray gleamed under the floodlights. Some junior aide stepped forward, white gloves precise. Cade looked at Specter. Up close, the sniper didn't look like a legend. They looked like a person who had spent too long on mountains, lean, sunburned, eyes with lines at the corners from squinting through scopes and into distant sun. There was a stillness to them, though, that said more than any swagger could have. "Sergeant," Cade said, pinning the weight of his attention. "Sir," Specter answered. He took the medal in his hand, its ribbon soft, its metal cold. "For extraordinary gallantry and skill under fire," he began, reading from the citation. The words tasted stale, old phrases applied to a new war. But he tried to put his own meaning into them. "For neutralizing an enemy fire coordination node at extreme range, directly saving the lives of hundreds on this ridge and altering the course of the battle." He stepped closer. He could have asked the sniper then, in a low voice only they would hear. "How did you do it?" He could have demanded the unvarnished truth, the misses, the math, the fear. Instead, he pinned the medal to their chest and said something else. "Thank you," he murmured, the words simple and heavy, "for staying on that rifle when everything was falling apart." Specter's gaze flickered just a little. "Didn't feel like we had much of a choice, sir." "There's always a choice," Cade said. "You chose to keep pulling the trigger until it mattered." He stepped back, saluted. The assembled soldiers responded crisply. Cameras clicked. Someone somewhere began an enthusiastic clapping that spread like a wave. Ash leaned in slightly as they turned to face the crowd. "You ever think about how that shot will look in a training manual?" he whispered. "They'll probably round the distance up," Specter muttered back, "and remove the part where I missed 13 times. Ash smiled. "That's okay. We'll keep that part." It didn't end there. Wars never do, not with one shot, no matter how legendary. There were more missions, more nights spent freezing on ridges, watching the heat blooms of enemy camps through thermal lenses. More days crawling through grass and rubble, and the weird peace of being the unseen eye in a chaotic field. Specter Six reputation spread ahead of them now. Sometimes it helped, opening doors and getting them access to gear. Sometimes it hindered, painting a target on their back in the minds of enemy counter-snipers eager to bag a trophy. Once, months later, they found themselves hunkered behind a broken wall in a ruined town, trading long-range shots with an opponent they never glimpsed directly. The duel stretched for hours, each side probing, attempting traps. Somewhere in that dance, a bullet chipped a brick inches from Specter's scope, showering their face with grit. "They're good," Ash muttered. "Smart. Patient." "Maybe they heard a story," Specter said. "About the shot?" Ash asked. "About refusing to die easy," Specter replied. They shifted positions 3 times. The 4th angle finally gave them the line they needed. The enemy never walked away, and the duel ended not in celebration, but in a quiet, tired nod between Specter and Ash. "Another ghost," Ash said. "Yeah, but the story of the 4,000-meter shot remained the one people always came back to." New recruits would approach them sometimes, shyly, eyes gleaming, asking for tips on long-distance shooting. Specter always started with the same question: "How good are you at missing?" It threw them. They expected talk of perfect sight alignment, steady presses breathing from the diaphragm. They got that, too, eventually, but Specter insisted on something else first. The willingness to learn from failure, the discipline to keep trying while knowing each miss had a cost. "We had 13 shots before the one that mattered," Specter would say. 13 misses. Each one told us something the last one hadn't. Each one was a conversation with the wind. If you're too proud to listen when you're wrong, you'll never make the shot when it counts. One young private frowned as he cleaned his rifle, processing that. "But people say you fired once," he said. "People say a lot of things," Specter replied. "You think legends are born fully formed?" "No, they're carved out of all the times we weren't perfect." Ash, leaning in a doorway, arms folded, added, "Perfection is just persistence that finally got noticed." The private thought about that for a long time. Years later, after the war had cooled and the mountains had returned to a silence that was only occasionally broken by the distant rumble of storms instead of guns, an instructor at the sniper school stood before a class of fresh faces. He tapped a laminated diagram pinned to the whiteboard behind him. "This," he said, "is the firing solution for a shot taken at roughly 4,000 meters during the Northern Ridge campaign." He ran his finger along the curve showing the bullet's arc, the corrections for wind, the estimated impact point. It was considered impossible at the time. Official doctrine said that effective sniper fire past 2,500 meters was more a matter of luck than skill. The environment variables stacked too high, especially in mountainous terrain. He gestured to the side of the diagram, where another sheet was taped. "These are the missed points." 13 small red dots clustered around a central mark. Each represents a shot that did not hit the intended target. Each represents data collected under fire, adjustments made on the fly. The sniper and spotter team involved took enormous risk with every trigger press. But they persevered. A hand went up. "Sir, why didn't they just call for artillery on the node?" a student asked. "Or an airstrike?" "Artillery was busy surviving," the instructor said dryly. "And air couldn't get through. Different war. Different constraints. Sometimes it really is just you, your rifle, your partner, and whatever gods you do or don't believe in." He let that sink in. Another hand. "Sir, is it true they fired only once?" The instructor smiled faintly. "That's the story people like to tell," he said. "It makes for a better headline. But a single shot doesn't appear out of nowhere. It rides on the back of every failure that came before it. He tapped the legend at the bottom of the diagram. Specter 6, they called the shooter. Spotter's name was Ash. They were just two people who did their job in a very bad moment. The general on that ridge? He screamed into a broken radio. Any snipers? And they answered. The class listened with the kind of focus that said this wasn't just history. It was possibility. So when you're out there, the instructor continued, and the wind is laughing at you, and your first shot goes wild, and your second is off, and the third digs a hole in a hillside far from where you wanted it. Remember this. The mountain doesn't owe you perfection. It owes you nothing at all. He looked each of them in the eye. But if you stay on the gun, if you keep listening, if you're willing to learn and keep learning even when you're under fire, one day, someone might whisper your name the way they whisper Specter 6. He paused, then added because it mattered. And if they ever say you fired once, you'll know the truth. You fired as many times as it took. On a quiet evening, long after the last official debriefing had been filed and forgotten to archives, Specter and Ash returned to the ridge. It wasn't planned. They'd been traveling between assignments, and their transport's route happened to pass near the old valley. On impulse, they'd requested a short stop. The pilot had shrugged and obliged. There were no shells now, no screaming orders, no frantic radio calls. The mountain, freed of its recent scars, wore new ones. Craters softened by seasons, trenches partially collapsed, rusting fragments of war embraced by creeping moss and hardy alpine grass. They climbed the slope where their old hide had been. The scrape was still there, though weather had rounded its edges. The view down into the valley was as wide and unforgiving as ever. Specter lay down in the same spot they had that day, this time without rifle, just to see the angle with fresh eyes. Still a long way, Ash said, crouching beside them. It always will be, Specter replied. They could see the ruined shape of the node on the far ridge, now just a jagged concretion in the rock, birds nesting in its crevices.